Okay, so we've been discussing and learning the Gemara about reciting a bracha and having others in mind when it comes to a food bracha, a Brochos hanehenin, blessing for benefit. It has different rules than a blessing on a mitzvah. So when you recite a bracha on a mitzvah is one thing. When you recite a bracha on something of benefit is another story. And because of that, the blessing on food, it could be that it needs more than just having someone else in mind. Like our Gemara, our Mishnah said that if they did Hasseba, if they leaned, that's when you would be able to have one person have everyone else in mind. Hasebu echad mevarich l'kulam. It was the last words on page 42a. Was if they leaned, one person could have everyone else in mind. And so our Gemara is really discussing that law about the leaning. Does it have to be leaning? Are there any other ways of joining people together to a communal meal that would allow one person to have others? Now, what we are dealing with is where both people are planning on eating. So it's not like one person is having someone else in mind because the other guy doesn't know the bracha, and I'm saying a bracha for nothing because I'm not eating anything and I'm just having someone else in mind. That's for sure not acceptable. I can't recite, like, you want to have a piece of cake and you say, I can't say the bracha, I don't know the bracha. Can you say the bracha for me? No, you can't. You can't say the bracha for someone else and have them eat the piece of cake. That doesn't work. However, what you can do is you can possibly, it depends on the conclusion of this Gemara, you possibly can have a piece of cake that you're going to eat, and they have a piece of cake that they're going to eat, and you could have them in mind when you say the bracha, depending on what we conclude here. Do you need to lean? Does it have to be a meal where you're leaning at, or is it doesn't matter if it's not bread? You know, depending on this discussion, which we started discussing yesterday about other foods besides bread. The Gemara's case was wine. Does wine have the same laws of bread? And would you need to lean for wine, or does leaning not work for wine, and so on? That's something that we touched upon yesterday, and that would have certain impact on the law. Can you have someone else in mind for a bracha? Now, when it comes to a mitzvah, is another story, because for a mitzvah, as long as you're obligated in the mitzvah, you could have someone else in mind, and they could say amen. And this applies, for example, scenarios where, let's say, you're reading the Megillah for other people. So you heard the Megillah already, and you're reciting a bracha for them so that they could hear the Megillah now. And you're saying the Megillah again, even you know, in addition to the bracha, the actual reading of the Megillah, you're having them in mind, and they are fulfilling their obligation from you. Now that works as long as you're obligated to read the Megillah. But if, let's say, you were exempt from the Megillah reading, let's say you were a child or something, that would be a problem for you to read for an adult. Or, for example, a child to bench for an adult could be a problem, because a child is not obligated, according to, you know, or even if he's rabbinically obligated, he's not biblically obligated. And then the adult might be biblically obligated. And there could be an issue there of having someone else in mind when you yourself are not obligated. And that's why there are certain laws that women cannot exempt men for, because if they're not obligated, they can't fulfill the mitzvah for a man. And so in any event, here we're dealing with having others in mind and the being able to be moitzi other people. Now, before
Rabbi?
this, yes.
Is a woman obligated to hear the Megillah?
A woman is obligated, yes.
So that means a woman can then read the Megillah and exempt other people.
A woman could exempt other people. There is a big discussion in the tractate Erchin if a woman could exempt, if a woman should read in public and exempt men or just women, or there's a whole Tosfos over there as well. It's a big discussion among the modern Orthodox women nowadays, that they want to lift up people wanting to lift up the level of women's authority on the and involvement in leadership areas, and so there's a big discussion. I'm sure you could find a lot of stuff on the internet about it. Can women read the Megillah in public, and so on? It's definitely a very popular thing, especially among modern Orthodox and the different groups. But among the ultra-Orthodox, we don't find much that the women are reading Megillahs, especially for men, but even for women, you don't find such a thing. So there is discussion if a woman could be a moyel, because she obligated herself in Milah. Is a woman considered as if she is circumcised already, and therefore she could fulfill the mitzvah of Milah for a male. I think the conclusion in Shulchan Aruch is that if she did it, the mitzvah has been fulfilled, but she doesn't recite a bracha on it. If I'm not mistaken, I know it's discussed as well. But in any event, a person who's obligated in something is able to be moitzi someone else, and that's regarding a mitzvah. Our Gemara is not talking about that. Our Gemara is talking about Berchas Hanehnim, blessings of praise of benefit, and blessings of benefit is in a different category. But we did touch upon what happens when you have a bracha of kiddush. And does the bracha, the bracha that you recited on kiddush, that Boirei Pri Hagafen, it includes two things. It's a mitzvah and it's a blessing of Boirei Pri Hagafen. But that would, that bracha you would be able to exempt. Of course, other people. We actually took it a step further yesterday. We were dealing with the blessing before the meal, if it will exempt the wine during the meal. And the discussion yesterday about that is based on this big Tosfos over here on page 42b, a very long Tosfos over here, and he deals with the fact that the wine before the meal exempts the wine after the meal. And Tosfos says, well, that should exempt the wine during the meal as well, because that wine is even less significant. So if the wine before the meal exempts the wine after the meal, it should exempt the wine during the meal. That wine is just for digestion purposes. And Tosfos says that if you make kiddush, recite kiddush, then that wine, the kiddush should exempt the meal wine. And Tosfos mentions the same thing should apply to Havdalah, that if you have a meal right after Havdalah, your Havdalah wine should exempt the wine during the meal after Havdalah. So if you have Malav Malka right after Havdalah, and Tosfos's case is where you wash your hands first. You wash your hands first, and you're going to recite Havdalah now, and the Havdalah should exempt the wine that you're going to have during the Malav Malka. And even though the Havdalah wine is really before the meal, but it's going to exempt that wine during the meal. There are those that question this and say that the Havdalah wine is not really part of the meal. Havdalah wine is part of the mitzvah. you're drinking it for the mitzvah of Havdalah. And therefore, maybe that wine would not exempt the later wine that you're eating during the meal. And even though Kiddush, you could say, will exempt the wine during the meal, that's because Kiddush is b'makom su'uda, it has to be part of the meal. Havdalah is a whole different story. So you may say that Havdalah, just because you made Havdalah on wine, it's not going to exempt the wine during the meal, even though you washed before. And so Taisus acknowledges this rebuttal to his view, but he seems to he seems to still follow his view, and he feels that Havdalah, if you recite Havdalah, it should exempt the wine that you drink during the meal afterwards during Malava Malka, as long as you washed beforehand. Now there is another view that I mentioned. Taisus doesn't bring this, but there is another view, and I think that's what Susan was mentioning. I said the Rush. There is another view mentioned in the Rush that that even if you didn't wash beforehand and you're reciting Havdalah and you're going to wash afterwards, that the wine will be exempted during the meal because of the Havdalah that you recited before the meal. So you recited Havdalah before the meal, it will exempt the wine that you have during the meal. Now Taisus concludes and he says, to get yourself out of all these problems and questions, Yesh machmir, and there are those that are machmir, he says, to make Havdalah before washing. And then you will get yourself out of this problem, because then for sure you would need to recite another bracha. You would recite an after bracha on the Havdalah wine, and you won't exempt the wine during the meal. You'll definitely need another bracha wine during the meal, and then you won't have any questions. However, doesn't perfectly work this advice from Taisus if you want to follow the Rush, because the Rush holds that even if you didn't wash before, you still are exempted from the wine during the meal. So the only way to get around that problem would be to have in mind you're not going to eat and drink any wine later, and you're only having in mind this cup of wine, and say the after bracha. And then if you decide to have wine during the meal, it's like a new decision of having wine during the meal, and you can recite a bracha on it, definitely according to all views. So that would be the way really around these questions. Now the Gemara that we learned yesterday, it mentioned that the Mishnah implies that when you lean, that's when you could exempt other people. And the Gemara asked a question, a contradiction, because we have a brisa that says when there's 10 people that are traveling, so even if they're eating from the same loaf of bread, they really should recite their own bracha. However, if they sit down, to eat, then it says, even if everyone is eating from their own bread, one person can exempt everyone. So that seems to be that was a contradiction from our Mishnah, which implied it's not enough to sit down. You need to recline in order to be able to have one person exempt everyone. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok said, it's not a contradiction. The answer is that if they establish and prepare a place where they are going to have this communal meal, that is similar to Hasseba, to reclining. So as long as they're making it official that this is where they are going to be communally eating together, and they establish a place, let's eat over there, and let's go there and eat together, that is considered good enough, like reclining. But if you didn't do that, then you would need to recline in order to make this an official communal meal where you're eating together. And then the Gemara mentioned the story that after Rav passed away, the students on their way back from the funeral, they wanted to eat something, and they wondered if they were allowed to have one person to do the zimun and have one person bench for everyone. And their question was based on our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says only if you recline, and they didn't recline. So maybe you have to recline in order to have this ability to be united in a communal meal. And the other option was maybe because they said that let's eat over there in that Nahar Danok, in that specific place. So maybe that's good enough, like reclining. And Rabbi Barava, he tore a second tearing of mourning. What he did was he had already his clothing was torn already because of the great Rav who passed away, his Rebbe, and he had the tear in the front of his garment. So he decided, because they have this question, and he felt like his Rebbe passed away a second time now, because now he realized how spiritually poor they are now that their Rebbe passed away, that he decided to tear a second mournful tear. And so he turned his clothing, his original tear, to the back of his garment. And now he tore again from the front of his garment, which was full at this point, and he tore it. And he said, Rav passed away, and we do not know the laws. We didn't learn the laws of Berachas Hamazon, of blessing, the laws of the grace after meal. And we should have learned it from him, how poor we are spiritually. And then an elderly person came and answered to them that they can bench together, and it's not a problem. One person is considered like Hasseba because they established this place. They planned on eating a meal in a specific place that was considered like Hasseba, like reclining. And one person can say the blessing for everyone. Yes, Susan.
Is the rabbi rebuking the students for not knowing the right thing to do? Is this a rebuke, or?
Well, it seems like he himself didn't know. So it doesn't sound like he's rebuking them. He's rebuking himself more. Like, it's too bad we didn't take advantage.
Understand, right? The grace.
We should have tried to study more from our Rebbe. We should have taken more, learned more from him, because now it's too late. How foolish we were that we didn't grab the opportunity.
That's very beautiful, the way that interpretation.
I think it's the simple understanding. I don't think I added much, but it's definitely a very powerful point that he makes. Then the Gemara had two versions of how to understand this law, or how to apply the law of Hasseba regarding bread. How can you apply it to other foods? And the example given is wine. So the Mishnah said that if you want one person to exempt everyone else, they need to recline. That was regarding bread. What about wine? So the first version was that Rav said that this law, that one person could exempt everyone else, it only applies to bread that you would need to recline in order for one person to exempt others. But wine doesn't need the Hasseba. You wouldn't need that. As long as people are drinking wine, one person could exempt everyone else, and that is good enough. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says, even wine needs reclining. You would need to recline and in order to exempt others. And the point is, Rav is understanding that wine is not as important as bread, and therefore something that's important like bread, in order to be able to unite the people, that one person would exempt everyone, you would need to recline, but wine wouldn't need that. And even without this Hasseba reclining, it's fine. We can exempt you for wine, no problem. Now, Rabbi Yochanan argued and he said, no, even wine needs a Hasseba. The way he's understanding it is wine is just as important as bread. Now, one of the things that we're going to try to figure out is how do we apply these laws to other foods? All we've done here is taken the Mishnah, which talked about bread, and we're now applying it to wine. And we have an argument between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. In the first version is that Rav holds wine is not as significant as bread, not as important. And Rabbi Yochanan says it is as important as bread. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you need to lean, you need to recline in order to be able to exempt someone for wine, just like you would need for bread. And Rav says, no, it's okay. Now, if you want to apply this to other foods, well, wine is very important. According to Rav, it's not as important as bread, but it's still important. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's just as important as bread. But let's say you want to apply it to a plum. So you want to eat a plum, and someone else wants to eat a plum, and you want to exempt them. So would you be able to? Well, a plum is not as significant, as important as wine. It's definitely not as important as bread. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, wine is just as important as bread. What about a plum? A plum is for sure less significant. So could you exempt, would you be able to, without reclining, would you be able to exempt someone when you have a plum? And the answer is yes. What about according to Rav? Well, Rav says wine you don't even need to have to recline. For sure, a plum you wouldn't need to recline in order to exempt someone. So according to the first version, it seems that wine is where there's a discussion, but anything less significant than wine, everyone would agree that you could exempt someone even without reclining. Right? That's what it sounds like from the first version. But now we're going to jump to the second version. Do you have a question, Simone, on this, or is your hand still up from the...
No, I have a question on this.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm looking for the underlying concept with reclining, especially since it was something that was only done in that period and we no longer recline, but we still have an issue of when we can exempt someone for a group. And seems to me that the underlying concept of reclining is that it's an indication of a joint meal where we've made a group, we've created a grouping, and that is what the reclining means, so that we can then apply it in our world today where we're no longer reclining. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've sort of touched upon that. We mentioned that Tosfos says that nowadays the way it would work is if you're sitting around a table, everyone's sitting together. So, it seems to be that seems to be the simple understanding. Yeah.
Rabbi.
Yes, Moshe.
Reclining on Pesach during the Seder.
Yeah.
Can that also exempt somebody who's not participating? I mean, who's not.
No, I don't think it's possible. I pushed this, but I'm fairly certain that's not possible.
So
you want to exempt people who are not reclining. You want to know if the person saying the bracha
No,
reclines
if
and the other
they
people don't?
if they can include, that's what I mean. If they can include by exempting, can they exempt somebody if they're reclining at the Seder table?
I have to ask him that. I don't.
So you're wondering because nowadays we don't recline? Is that what you're asking? I'm not sure what you mean to say. What do you want? Who do you want to exempt? What do you want to do? You want to eat the matzah and someone else doesn't eat the matzah, and you think you'll fulfill the mitzvah for them?
Is that during the Seder, I mean,
yeah,
you recline. So
right.
Is that has been retained? Apparently, that is something that seems. I'm asking if that has something to do with the regular meal that we have throughout the year. If they discontinued that, but I wanted to know if on Pesach.
Yeah. So you're right, actually, if that's what, that the reclining that we do during the Seder is similar to this law that maybe they used to do when they had a, official meal. they would recline, and we are in the Seder, it's a sign of freedom. It's a sign of luxury. So if that's what you mean, yes, that's a sign of luxury, and that was a sign that they were having a communal meal together. So yeah, that would be the reason, yeah. But it doesn't help. You cannot fulfill. It wouldn't help to exempt someone. If they're number one, if they're not, they also have to eat. You're only exempting them in bracha. You can't exempt them with the food. And even then, it would seem that everyone needs to be participating in order to be exempted. Only the people who are participating are exempted. Okay, but yeah, you are correct that's it's based on that this idea that reclining was something that was done for luxury and a sign of freedom. Okay, now the next version of the Gemara, it actually comes out very different than the first version, because the next version of the Gemara says that Rav holds that reclining works for bread, but for wine, it's not going to help. You won't be able to recline something that's not significant. So reclining doesn't make it into an official meal. It won't, because it's not such a significant thing. And therefore, Rav says that wine is different than bread. So therefore, you can never really exempt someone from with the bracha of wine, because it's not a significant food, even if you recline. You're not really, joining together for an official meal. Rabbi Yochanan argued and said that even wine, Hasseba will work for. You will be able to exempt others with wine, because wine is significant like bread, and you have a meal of wine, you have a meal of bread. It's good enough. You can do the Hasseba. Now, what will this mean if you want to exempt someone for a plum? You're eating a plum and they're eating a plum, and you want to exempt them. So according to Rav says that even wine, you can't exempt anyone. Even if you're reclining, you can't exempt them. So for sure, for a plum, you also can't. And Rabbi Yochanan says wine you can exempt someone for, because wine is just as significant as bread. But a plum is less than wine. And therefore, you would not be able to exempt someone on a plum. That would be so this would really be a major debate. This debate seems to be a major issue of exempting others with brachas on food that's not bread. Anything besides for bread, it seems to be a big issue. Wine, well, wine itself would be a machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Now, whenever we have a machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, the halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan, right? The halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan. Now, what does Rabbi Yochanan say? That wine is just like bread, right? Rabbi Yochanan says wine is just like bread. So a lot of people, they learn this argument between the first view and the second view, and they say, well, Rabbi Yochanan says the same in both. Rabbi Yochanan, according to the first version, Rabbi Yochanan says wine is the same as bread. The second version, Rabbi Yochanan says wine is the same as bread. So if you simply learn it on a very surface level, what you think is, well, Rav is the opinion that changed in both versions, because Rav in the first version says that wine doesn't need Hasseba. You could exempt someone without Hasseba. In the second version, Rav says wine doesn't even work Hasseba, and you can never exempt someone for wine. But Rabbi Yochanan was the same in both versions. Rabbi Yochanan said in the first version, wine is just like bread. You need Hasseba, it works. Second version, wine is just like bread. Hasseba works to buy. So it sounds, if we hold like Rabbi Yochanan, you may say there's no real difference between the first version and the second version, because Rabbi Yochanan basically says the same thing. However, if you get deeper down into the understanding of the argument, you realize that there's a huge difference between the first version and the second version, even according to Rabbi Yochanan, even though he said the same exact thing in the first version and second version. But when you read the context of the first version, you realize because of what Rav says, his statement has a whole different meaning than in the second version, based on what his debater is, based on what the other opinion is. You can see that because now what you're doing is you're applying his law to other food items. So when you start applying his law to other food items, you start realizing that what he's saying is not just wine versus and bread. What he's saying is what is he implying regarding other foods. So in the first version, what comes out is that other foods, what he's saying is other foods will not need reclining, and you can exempt someone even without reclining. That's basically what he's saying. Because if you see what Rav says and you see what Rabbi Yochanan says, Rav says even wine doesn't need reclining. Rabbi Yochanan says no, wine needs reclining. But what is he saying? But other foods don't. Wine is unique. In the second version of the statement between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, in the second version, you have Rav saying that wine, it doesn't help to recline. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, wine, it also helps. Wine is also very important. Wine, it helps to recline. But what he's saying is other foods, it will not help you if you recline, and you will not be able to exempt someone. So it's a huge difference, even in Rabbi Yochanan, even though he says the same words. But if you take the context and you see what they're arguing about, you realize that there is a huge difference between the first version and the second version. Now, in halacha, generally we say that we follow Rabbi Yochanan, but we don't know which Rabbi Yochanan. We either have the first version of Rabbi Yochanan and the second version of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, generally in the laws of Brochos, we're lenient. So we say, the Savik Brochos lahakil. So if one person exempts someone else with the bracha, you'd be lenient. We could follow the first version. First version is more lenient. You could always exempt someone on any food, even if they're not lenient. But the second version would say you can't exempt them. Even if they are lenient, it doesn't work to exempt someone. You can't exempt someone. So that's more strict. So generally we would say in the laws of Brochos that the first version would be the correct version. However, there is the Ravid says that we follow the second version. So I think the majority of the opinions say we follow the first version, but the other view as well. So in any event, now Gemara is going to ask a contradiction. Meisvei. The Bnei Yeshiva asked this question, this contradiction from a brisa. So let me tell you where we are. We are holding the last word on the line is Meisvei. It's about 10 lines down from the top of the page. We are on page 43a. 43a, we're at the word Meisvei. The Bnei Yeshiva asked this contradiction from a brisa. Ketzad Seder Hasseba. What is the order of leaning? Orchen nechnasin. The guests enter to the house of the host. We're talking about generally, well, Rashi over here brings that it brings in a later Rashi that we're dealing with wealthy hosts that are inviting the poor people to their table, and the order, the way it was done, is as follows. So the guests enter. The yoshvin al gabi safsalin val gabi katedrois. They sit on top of safsalin or chairs or couches and the type of chairs, katedrois, ajay kansu kulam, until everyone enters. So they enter this this room that's sort of like a lounge, and until everyone enters. Heviu lehem mayim, they bring them water to wash their hands. Kol echad noitel yodei achas, everyone washes one hand. And the reason they're doing this is they're going to be receiving a cup to drink, and they wash the hand before they receive that cup. And Rashi tells us that it's this is the drink before the meal. And what it seems like is we're dealing with wine.
There weren't many choices.
Now, the question is, so what are they drinking? What are they washing their hand for? Taisva says that the reason they're washing their hand is to honor the bracha. They're honoring the bracha, and therefore they're washing their hand before they recite the bracha. It's covered for the bracha, and that's why they did this. Now, balahem yayin, so they would bring, the wine was brought to them. Kol echad mevarech liatzmai, so everyone would recite the bracha to themselves. They're not going to exempt, one person is not exempting the others, but they're all reciting their own bracha. Alo v'hasebu, they got up onto their type of bed, and they reclined, some type of couch, and reclined. Ubalahem mayim, and they brought them water. Af al pi shekol echad v'echad notel yodei achas, even though that before they drank the cup of wine, which was beforehand, they already washed one hand. Now they do wash both hands. And balahem yayin, and when they bring them the wine, even though everyone recited a bracha originally for themselves, echad mevarech l'kulan, one is now going to recite the bracha for everyone. Now, everyone is probably bothered with a question over here. I'm sure you're all bothered with a question. Anyone want to ask the most famous question on this?
What bracha?
Okay, anyone want to explain what Isaac just said? Why are they reciting another bracha on the wine? Right? We said they originally recited a bracha on the wine before the meal. And now it mentions that they're going to have wine, let's say, during the meal. And one person will be reciting the bracha for everyone.
The answer is the wine that they had before the meal, they were not together. They were not a group. They were individuals. But once
who cares? They said the bracha individually.
They said
the bracha individually.
Right.
Now,
once they came into the hall and they were seated, then they were already a group. So that one person can then say the bracha and exempt them.
Yeah, but they already fulfilled their obligation. We learned the Mishnah before. If you recite a bracha on wine before the meal, it exempts the bracha of the wine during the meal. That for sure exempts the bracha during the meal. It exempts the bracha even after the wine after the meal. For sure it exempts the bracha during the meal. Yes, Susan.
Okay, I think it has to be either a Friday night or a holiday, and that's why they're having two different blessings, and at two different, maybe closer together. It has to be some kind of holiday or a Friday night or a Friday night with a holiday. Has to be something like that.
Okay, that's an interesting
They
thought.
changed place. They're in a different place now.
Right.
So it's
So
like
that-
it's a new situation. It's not like they were going from the wine to a meal. They were in a different situation as they moved from I think of it like at our yeshiva dinners. Before you actually go into the hall where the dinner is, everybody is like wandering around. People come in, go at different times, and wine is being served. You're individually there. You're in like a different situation. Once the doors open, everybody goes into the hall, then we're all together. That's the meal. That's when it starts. That's
Okay. Ben?
Is it because Netilat Yadayim that they did?
No.
No.
So Rashi over here tells us that he says they need another bracha because the earlier bracha doesn't exempt them, because the first one is not called the wine before the meal, because they're not eating the meal in that place. So the second wine that they're having, we're actually going to call the second wine the wine before the meal. The second wine. The first wine is in a different location, really like Simone said, but the way Rashi says it is, we're actually going to consider the second wine, that the second wine is really the wine before the meal, and the earlier wine was a pre. You have like the pre-party, the earlier, I don't know what they call those parties before the event, and then you have like the earlier for the original, the first one.
Maybe
the first pre-party.
They are those.
Right, no, but they have like these pre-Simchas Torah things, and then you have the they start making earlier ones in the pre. So anyway, they have this earlier wine. That's not even part of it. Now they're changing place, and this is an important halacha that when a person changes the place, so that would be like a hefsek. They would need another bracha, and so the first bracha doesn't necessarily exempt them. Of course, this deals with complicated laws of changing place if you have in mind, or does it work? That if you have in mind, then maybe it wouldn't be. It's not so simple that it doesn't cover it. So it deserves more looking into research, in especially the details of these halachas. But this is the way Rashi is translating this case. Yes, Susan.
Okay, they in the very beginning they never said that all these people sat down. They're all standing around, and that's
Okay.
What's
wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong. It's just that they're not really together.
Okay, who cares? Why do they need to be together?
They have to wash one hand and say a blessing to make them all together as one, and then they move into another part. So it has to be the real.
If they were together, then they wouldn't need to recite their own brachas. Then one person could exempt everyone. Why do you want them to be together? Let them be separate. They're standing. They're not together. Who cares?
Until they're all. In other words, the guests enter and sit on benches until they're all assembled. That's what it says in the very beginning. So
Okay.
they're not really together then?
Right. Well, halachically, if you want to say are they in the same room? Well, once they enter, then they're all together in the same room. But until then, you're right. Some of them are still entering, some aren't. I don't know. What you want, the halacha translation of together, or you want the physical? Are they together? I mean, they're slowly entering the room. They're slowly entering the room. Each one is going to recite the bracha on their own, and then afterwards. So one person is going to recite the bracha.
Wash one hand. I don't understand why they only wash one hand in the very beginning when they know they're going to have another blessing. I don't understand that.
You want them to wash two or none?
Both
What would you rather?
No.
Why both? Why should they wash both? They're honoring the bracha by washing the hand that they're holding the wine in. That's
more honorable, in other words.
The bracha. They just want to hold the wine in the hand with a. I mean, at least that's Tosfos' shot. There is other ways of explaining it that has to do with truma, and they're washing the hand that's going to touch it, so it shouldn't become tummy. But in any event, the point is that this is not the washing for bread, and this is a washing for the holding the wine. Okay, so the Gemara now develops its thought. of the thought of the contradiction, the explanation. The Gemara is developing its the Bnei Yeshiva, the students of the yeshiva, the rabbinic students, are now explaining the question. Laheyach lishna the Amar Rav. According to the that version that Rav said, Lo shanu elapas the by Hasseba, that the Mishnah spoke about bread that it needs reclining. Aval yayin lo by Hasseba, but wine doesn't need reclining. Then the question would be, what would the question be? The question is, why did they all need to recite their own bracha? Wine doesn't need reclining. Kasha Resha. Wine doesn't need reclining, according to Rav. Right? So this is a question on Rav. First language, the first version. We got to figure out why Rav said that you don't need reclining for the wine, and one person should exempt everyone. And in the first scenario where they entered for the original cup of wine, why did they have each person reciting his own bracha? One person could have recited it for everyone because wine doesn't need reclining. So kasha resha. So the Gemara answers, Shani Orchim. Guests are different. Did Daitayu Lameach, that their mind is to uproot their location. And even according to Rav, in this scenario, they're just sort of like waiting around for the rest of the people to enter. And when he says wine doesn't need Hasseba, it's not exactly that you don't need anything, that one person could just exempt anyone. It's specifically in a way that they are going to be drinking wine together. And not that they're going to be leaving and having the meal somewhere else. So it works if they're going to have the meal, the time of the meal. You know, it's not just free for all, so to speak. So now the Gemara continues, and it says, and according to the other language, the other, before we do this, I'm going to do the Rashi Insight. Shani Archem de Daitayu Lameach. Guests are different, that their mind is to uproot their location. And Rashi says, or about 20th line in Rashi, they're going to end up moving from their location and reclining in a different place. This is not the place of their reclining or their party. They're just hanging out here. They're waiting here until everyone enters. This was the way of wealthy household owners, that they would invite poor guests, and that's why we call them orchim. Lahachi kari lahu orchim, calling them guests. We're not just dealing with members of the house. We're dealing with actual guests. In this, that Rav says wine doesn't need Hasseba, yain loy bay Hasseba li yeshiva ba'alma shlei b'shas kamer. When he says wine doesn't need Hasseba, but just sitting together would be good enough, that's if they're not going to have a meal, or if it's at a time of a meal and in the place of the meal. And here you don't have any of this. They are having a meal, so you don't have the exemption of that they're not having a meal, or additionally, they are having a meal, but this is not when they're having it, and this is not the location where they're having it. So because of those reasons, Rav would agree in this case that you need to recite your own bracha. And now the Gemara continues and says, "Ulaheyach lishna the Amar Rav," and according to the other version, that Rav said, "Lo shanu el pas the mahanya le Hasseba," that the Mishnah that mentioned bread reclining works, but wine reclining doesn't work. So Kasha Seifa, you have a question from the conclusion of this brisa, because the conclusion of the brisa had said that when they go and they recline and they wash both hands, and when wine comes, one person exempts everyone. Why does that work? How could they have one person exempting everyone with wine? According to Rav, even if you recline, it doesn't work. So the Gemara answers that Shani Hassam, there is different in the Brisa that they're eating a meal. Since their reclining is going to work for bread, it also works for the wine. So now we have some new clarity in this issue of reclining, that reclining maybe is not necessary for wine, but there are some qualifications to it. According to the version that you don't need reclining for wine, you do need that it's either it's only wine that they're having, or it's at a time of a meal in the place of the meal that you don't need to recline, or in the other version that wine it doesn't help to recline. That's if you're not going to have bread, but once bread, the reclining is a significant. There's a meal that's happening. So it's a significant reclining. This is a significant meal. So even for the wine, it also will work the reclining, and you can have one person reciting the bracha for everyone. Now comes the next Gemara, and the next Gemara says, "Balahem yayin b'seicha mozai." If wine comes during the meal, so we said that everyone should recite the bracha themselves. But wine comes after the meal, one person will exempt everyone. So Sholuas ben Zoyma, so they asked ben Zoyma, Mipnema Amru, Kolahem Yayin B'Seicha Mazon, Kolechem Brach Le'atzmi. Why do we say that if wine comes during the meal, everyone will recite the bracha for himself, and you don't have one person exempting everyone? But Le'achar Mazon, after the meal, Echad Mevarech L'Kulam, one person will recite the bracha for everyone. So why what is the reason for that? So we touched upon this in the Mishnah. I tried to give you a little short answer to it, and this is this Gemara. Amar Lohen, so Ben Zoyma answered, Hoyel ve'ein beis habliya panu. The reason why everyone should recite their own bracha is because they're involved in eating the meal, and if you want one person to exempt everyone else for the wine, they're in the middle of swallowing the food, and therefore they're not gonna. You don't have one person exempting everyone for the wine. Now, what does that mean? Just because you're busy swallowing your food, you don't have one person. What is the reason? What is specifically the reason? What is wrong with having one person?
Maybe because they didn't finish eating. They're still swallowing.
And what's wrong if they're still swallowing?
Well, you don't say a blessing before you finish.
Okay, all right. So in other words, it's as if they're eating while they're saying a bracha.
While somebody's saying the bracha, they are still eating.
Not right.
Okay, Susan, what did you want to say?
But that's not right. It says here that everybody has to be in sync with each other if they're going to say a blessing after the meal. In other words, one person they have to wait till everybody's finished eating, then you can say the blessing.
Yeah, we're talking about the wine during the meal, and the reason why you can't have one person exempting. You're having wine during the meal, and the reason why one person does not exempt. Why is
nothing on behalf of them all?
What did you say?
People are not available. They're eating. They have food in their mouth. They're not.
Okay, and what's wrong? What's wrong with that?
They're not able to say a blessing.
They're not
Yeah.
supposed to. One person, let one person say it and they can
That's what I'm
just
saying. They're
listen.
saying one person can say the blessing for everybody, but after the meal.
No. We said that one person cannot. During the meal, one person cannot say the blessing for everyone.
Not say,
And we're trying to explain why. Yes, Ezra.
So the way Safari explains it is the fact that you'd have to wait for everybody to finish in order for an individual to say for everybody. And so it'd be a tircha on everybody else to wait until this individual, until everyone finishes
swallow.
so that one person can do it. So therefore, the rabbi said it's not worth waiting. And so everyone should say it for themselves.
oh,
Right.
okay.
Okay. One of the explanations is that we're afraid when they say amen to the bracha, they might end up it might be that they have food in their mouth, and talking and saying the word amen while having food in one's mouth could cause them to choke. And this is one of the explanations that we didn't want we didn't want people to have to say the amen while they might have food in their mouth. And so that's one of the explanations. There are a number of explanations. Rashi says that because their mouth is not empty, so they won't be able to concentrate on the person reciting the bracha.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, again, I'm picturing the yeshiva dinner, so everybody's sitting at the same table, but people are like in different stages of eating. They're paying attention to their food, or they're talking to the person next to them, or they're checking their cell phone, or everybody's in a different place. So they're not in the sense of ready to stop everything and listen to one person making a bracha. So each person is individually responding and obligated for their own bracha, for the wine.
So that's what it seems like is the explanation, that they're not able to
Rabbi,
one person is
after the
eating,
meal?
one person isn't. What
about after the meal?
do you mean? What about? We said that after the meal, one person can exempt them.
Can say the blessing for everyone?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Well, how do you know when the meal is ended? How do you know that?
So
When
we've
they
had
come
this
and they take
discussion
the plates away.
that in the
They come
olden
and
days,
place-
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
we've had this discussion, and we said
Right.
that nowadays we don't really have that, but in the olden days they did.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, I should say that the way Rashi seems to understand it is that because you're busy eating, you're not going to be able to concentrate enough on the bracha. So it's not just that you wouldn't be able to say the bracha, you're not up to it, whatever. It's more of an issue of concentration. So it adds a slightly different twist to this to the explanation here. But I think what it does tell us is how important it is to concentrate on a bracha. That if they were busy eating something that they liked, I guess, so they're not able to concentrate. The wine is poured; they have it in front of them, but they're not able to concentrate because their base habliya, their throat is swallowing some other food that tastes good, so they're not going to be able to concentrate enough on the bracha that's being recited. So they're concentrating on swallowing. So I think it shows us how important it is that we should concentrate on our brachas when we recite a bracha. Okay, well, I guess we're going to have to stop here. It's 11 o'clock. One of the things that we're going to have to talk about is the standing for Kiddush and Havdalah. Should we really be sitting together in order to exempt other people for Kiddush and for Havdalah? So hopefully we'll get the answer before Shabbos. Okay, Sei gesund, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
thank
Rabbi.
Thank
you, Rabbi.
Stay